Welcome. My name is Penny Rosema, and you're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast. One of CMA's goals is to keep our members informed. Now, you can find more information about our association from our website, cookware.org. In this podcast, our focus is on cybersecurity. Issac Barker is our guest, and Issac works for RMS in Chicago. He's a supervisor in the area of security and privacy services with a specialty in cybersecurity and data forensic investigations. Now, you can find more information about RSM at their website, rsmus.com. Looking around on that website, and I found some helpful links, including why manufacturers need to boost their cybersecurity. And there's another very helpful link, just what we offer, as well as how to get a hold of them if you had some additional questions after this podcast. We are especially excited to interview Issac today because he is our guest speaker at the CMA Fall Meeting in Chicago in September. That's on September 9th and 10th. So you can find more information about that event, the CMA Fall Meeting, if you go to cookware.org and click on the event link. It's very obvious once you go to cookware.org. That was a mouthful, but let's welcome Issac. Hello, Issac, and welcome to our podcast.
Hi, how are you doing today? And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, I'm doing great, and I'm real excited about our conversation to become more informed about the area of cybersecurity. We know it's a regular news item. Many are familiar with the concept and have heard about data breaches and ransomware, and hopefully you that are listening right now haven't had a specific incident. And that's what we want to try and avoid for everyone. So let's first talk about one item that comes to mind is encrypted data. Does it give organizations a false sense of security? When I hear encrypted data, I'm thinking, hey, data should be safe. It's, encrypted. Cyber attacks are no problem. But in some conversations with you, Issac, I think that might be a misconception about encrypted data. Could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. So a lot of times what we see on the end client's perspective is they'll come back to us and say, our data is encrypted. We're sure that we're safe. We don't have any worries, anything like that. Unfortunately, the reality of encrypted data isn't necessarily going to protect you. Encrypted data means that no one else can see it if they have access to it. The problem with what you mentioned before, Penny, was ransomware. So if folks come in, an attacker comes in to compromise the system and they infect your system with ransomware, what they're going to do is they're going to encrypt all of your files. So when they encrypt all of your files, they're in fact kind of double encrypting them. You have your encryption over them, which is great because they can't read them per se, but they also encrypt a second layer over them so that you have no access to them. You have access to your encryption key, but not access to their encryption key. So in effect, holding you ransom to pay them to get your encrypted data. A quick example there is we have a client who is a government manufacturer. They have various kind of government contracts. They get paid a large sum, about $800,000 plus a month for this contract, and they got affected by ransomware. They had all their files encrypted. They were sure everything was fine. They got affected by ransomware, got them double encrypted, and came to us and said, "Hey, what do we do?" And they were to the point of where instead of just trying to restore from backups or anything like that, they were going to pay a ransom, which was just south of $1 million. So that's kind of where that comes full circle as far as the false sense of security regarding just encrypting data.
Interesting. So the encryption says, yes, my data is encrypted. They can't read it, but neither can I because they've double encrypted it.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. That's a whammy. I think another challenge that smaller and mid-sized market, businesses, they think maybe they're not at risk, that it's only large organizations. You gave an example of a very large, what I consider a very large contract. Is it just the larger businesses that are at the greater risk? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the biggest misconception there is that everybody sees the breaches in the news, right, or compromises, cyber attacks in the news, whether it's Target, Equifax, Experian, Walmart, whatever the most prominent breaches have been in the last 5 years. Anybody can name them from the news. That's kind of the common misconception, to think that those are the only ones because they make headlines. We deal with small to mid-market clients every single day. We deal with a lot of dentist groups. We deal with a lot of farm groups, small manufacturing companies. One that we recently had was a small dentist group, maybe two different sites where they conducted business, maybe 10 employees or so. I would consider that a pretty small business, especially compared to the previous example. They were infected with malware and basically halted their operations. So what happened was the attacker came in with malware, and instead of using ransomware, they basically used malware to affect all of their systems and effectively shut down their operations. And in that instance, they couldn't pay their employees, they couldn't pay their utilities, they couldn't use their computers whatsoever. So for a business like that, a small business, it basically, puts them out of commission unless they do what the attackers want, or unless they're able to restore from some form of backup, or if they have some form of alternative. Clients that are that small, 10 employees, don't necessarily have a robust backup solution, which kind of comes into the point I made earlier. It's not just the target large businesses that are affected, but small businesses are affected just as much, in the sense that they may even be easier targets. You can hit 10 small businesses in the same amount of time that you would hit one medium to large size business from an attacker's perspective.
Yeah, interesting and scary, obviously.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the common types of cyber incidents. You've given us a couple examples, but when you come to talk to us too, what would be kind of the top line examples, most common types of cyber attacks?
Sure. Yeah. So the top three that we mostly see, I brought three that I wanted to just touch on briefly. So the first one I mentioned is ransomware. Ransomware is really big these days because it's pretty easy. And I would say ransomware is actually probably number 2 on the actual most frequent list, but it's kind of the most intriguing one that we see, right? So basically folks come in to give a denial of service on your data. So they compromise your systems, and they don't necessarily do anything to your systems other than the fact that they don't take your files out, but they make them unavailable to you. So that's one example, is ransomware. The second I mentioned in the previous example is just general malware, or kind of banking Trojan malware. A lot of those variants of malware are used to steal and harvest credentials. So once they get on your system, they're stealing bank information, they're stealing your login info, they're stealing all of that info that you've typed into browsers, any type of credentials that they can get their hands on. I would say that's number 3 in the most relevant or most frequent in our case. Number 1 is what we call BEC, or business email compromise. So a lot of those are phishing attempts or brute force attempts to any type of email platform, whether it be Exchange on-prem, even Office 365 or other platforms. We see a lot of business email compromise, phishing compromise of cloud accounts. That is the most prevalent by far, because it's so easy for an attacker. An attacker from anywhere in the world can hit your system and try and guess your password or send you a phishing email. With ransomware, a lot of times, even small clients have at least somewhat of a safeguard to put at least a little more effort into the attacker's hands to compromise the system. Whereas a business email compromise, Penny, me, or you could both take an email, create an email address, create a fake email to someone and try and steal their credentials. Give me 15, 20 minutes, and anybody can do it from anywhere. The ease of use from an attacker makes it kind of the most prevalent of what we see today.
Okay, so you talked about 3 different ones. Ransomware, which is, kind of in the category, and most frequent it was a deny of service. So then you're going to have to pay somebody to get yourself back in gear. Malware, you talked about, was stealing the credentials. Do they go from malware? So then once they have your credentials, is that what leads them to come back and do the ransomware? Is that connected?
Yes, so they are very well connected, actually. So a lot of times what we see is hybrid attacks of they'll use the malware to get into a system, and then once they're in the system, they use the malware to spread. So think of it this way. You start on one system, you've got John Smith's computer, and he's connected via the network to 7 other folks that aren't infected at the point. So they use that malware to go throughout the system and connect to the other 7 folks. And then from there, once they have access to each of those, all they have to do is take the ransomware, hit a few buttons, click, and then everything starts encrypting automatically. So they do work hand in hand. Not necessarily, they're not mutually exclusive, but it just kind of depends on the scenario.
Right. The third one you mentioned was the phishing. And I know I've heard examples of, and I heard someone from your organization speak at another event and talked about, the phishing and how sometimes organizations will have something in place, rules or, how to operate and what to click on and what not to click on. And sometimes the executives are the worst offenders of not following protocol and procedure. And that must be where some of that phishing starts at the top level.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a loaded question, but you're correct. It does kind of start at the top level from time to time, but that's not necessarily, again, mutually exclusive. A lot of times that we see are attackers not necessarily targeting the CEO or the CFO or C-suite individuals. They're targeting folks in HR. They're targeting folks in accounts receivable, accounts payable, someone in finance, anyone that's dealing with financial information. So what we'll see is they can pivot elsewhere. So even if you get an attack from an attacker's perspective, if I get access to someone who's in human resources, I can use that access to gain intel on the organization, right? So is the CEO doing a wire transfer every day at 7 p.m.? If not, then maybe I'll pivot to somebody in accounts payable. So it's not necessarily just C-suite. It really depends on the financial gain of the actor and how they can gain that in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, that makes sense, because one of my next questions was going to be, is this just an executive management issue? Are people saying, well, hey, our organization has to put in the safeguards and the process and the procedures so that everybody in the organization follows it, and I'm just in, some more technical role and there's nothing I can do about it, or I'm not, going to be the one that's going to be the problem. But it's not just an executive issue then.
Yeah. So, and kind of like you mentioned, to reiterate too, there's two parts, right? So there's proactive security, which certainly does start at the top down. If you don't have a CEO or CFO, or C-suite just in general, that's kind of promoting proactive security, it's going to trickle down, and then it goes, down through the IT staff, and, whether it's, the IT manager or an IT intern, that all trickles down from the top. Yeah, as far as targets and actual attacks and compromises, that doesn't necessarily start down from the top. Attackers won't discriminate based on title. They will discriminate based on what is easiest for them to get a payday.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So we all have to be aware, which leads to my next point here. I want to remind listeners that they're listening to the Cookware Manufacturers Association podcast. Issac will be a guest speaker at the fall meeting in Chicago, and he's joining us today to share his expertise and insight on cyber criminals and real-world compromises. Remind everyone that you can find more information about the organization Issac is with. RMS.com is the website. And of course, you can find more information about our Cookware Manufacturers Association and the registration link for the fall meeting by going to cookware.org and looking for the event link. Can't miss it. It's on the homepage. Issac, you've got a lot of valuable information. We've only had a short time here today, but what can you give us any more insight to what CMA members or some of our guests might expect to hear from you on that topic of cybersecurity at our fall meeting in Chicago?
Yeah, sure thing. So some of the stuff we discussed today is pretty brief examples, pretty high level. During that presentation, we'll go through kind of individual. What I like to do during presentations is take actual user data that we've seen in the wild, kind of sanitize it to make it into an example without revealing the actual party that was affected, and kind of walk through that. Give an example of, a lot of folks say, we aren't going to be affected by that, similar to the encryption example that we talked about in, your first question there. I like to kind of break that down to show, real world examples of how folks, are falling for these phishing attempts, or, real world security loopholes that attackers are using on a regular basis that people may not even think about. So I like to kind of go into a little more details to show folks that it's not just a statistic. There are folks being affected by this, and just kind of what some kind of general tips and guidelines might be to resolve some of those issues for your own organization.
Yeah, we like tips and any information that provides us with awareness and especially prevention. So that's going to be a very valuable topic. I'm looking forward to meeting you face to face there. Listeners, my name is Penny Rosema. We're recording for CMA, Cookware Manufacturers Association. Find more information on our website, cookware.org. And I remind listeners, whether you're a member or not, the Cookware Manufacturers Association is a valuable resource. Our members comment on the values include we maintain and update the engineering standards for the production of the cookware and bakeware in the U.S. We provide timely statistical reporting for our members. We offer resources for retailers, including cookware training guides, also very helpful for new staff orientation within the cookware, bakeware manufacturing industries. And when you are part of our association, you are networking with the best in the industry. And of course, we have valuable resource links like the podcast where you'll be listening to today. So want to learn more about the benefits, contact us. We'd love to talk to you about what our association is. And to remind everyone, you'll find this podcast on both our website, but also on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And Isaac, thank you. Thank you for taking time today. We're going to look forward to seeing you in September.
Hey, no problem at all. I look forward to speaking. Look forward to meeting a lot of folks in person.
All righty. Well, we appreciate it. And that makes a wrap for this episode. And I thank you, everyone, for listening. Enjoy the day.